keeping notes, please be sure to sign into your Gmail accounts, and please be using the active chat box and commenting. Makes this session more interactive and fun, if it's only for your benefit. All right, so we'll get right into it today. So, integrity. So, what's the first word that comes to mind when you guys think of integrity?
Honest.
Yeah, that's mine too. Honesty, right? So, I want you guys to ask yourself, does integrity mean to you? It could be in a real life situation, it could be in a hypothetical situation. So, integrity to me would mean not cheating on a test, right? So, what would integrity mean to you in your life, right? How can you show integrity?
Not following the crowd.
Yeah, doing what's best for you and not for the crowd, right?
Whatever you do, you have to be honest with yourself rather than showing off to others.
Yes. Good. All right. So the textbook definition of integrity is the quality of being honest, right? That's the word we often associate with integrity, but it's also having strong moral principle, right? So as I said, what integrity means to me, right? It's knowing what is right and wrong as well, right? That's a big thing with integrity, and acting on it, right? You could know stuff, but just because you know it and you don't act on it is two different stories, right? So it's not technically integrity if you know what's right and wrong, right? But you still choose to pursue the wrong thing, right? So it's just knowing what's right and wrong and acting on it. For me, that's my personal definition, and I encourage you guys to also look at your personal definitions of what integrity means to you. All right, so what are some traits that a person with integrity embodies? We talked about honesty, right? Are there any other words that comes to mind?
Righteousness.
Righteousness is good. Authentic is one. So down to earth, right? They're similar. So these are just some of the traits: righteous, honest, pure, down to earth, authentic, that a person with integrity embodies. And why is that? Well, if a person's honest, right? They value other people and give it credit where it's due. And that's what a person with integrity does. They're down to earth. They're true to themselves, but they're also true to others, right? They don't have a facade on. They don't try to appear something they're not. And then they're also authentic. So they never take advantage of others or anything of that sort. So now we're going to talk about why should you have integrity, right? This is, I think, a running theme in these sessions where we ask why, right? Why for each word? Well, why for integrity, right? Any ideas? What does it result in? What are some feelings associated with it?
And you don't have to hide anything in life.
Yeah, so simple life. That's good. No hiding, no facade or anything. Well, here I have one is feelings of contentment, right? Because whatever you do, you're content with it, right? You have fulfillment. You have a simple life, like you were talking about. You have a happier outlook on life, where you're not always trying to cover up for a lie you made or something like that. And then you have positive thoughts, and these, along with integrity, are also associated with which virtue? Honesty as well. So that means what's going to happen? We did a session on honesty before, and we talked about how when you're honest, right? Even if it doesn't look like it, there's still going to be the best decisions for you, right? A lot of people are very hindsighted and look at the short term, right? So a lot of people don't consider the long term gain from it. So that's one thing. So the feelings of honesty, comforting, truthfulness, and someone who has integrity, right? It's good to be around that person, right? They bring out the best in you and encourage you to do the right thing, right? Integrity is about big right and wrong. So there's that. Otherwise, if you don't, what's the argument? What happens when you don't have integrity, right? It results in feelings of dissatisfaction, unease. It results in a complex life where you're trying to appear something you're not, and that's always harder than just being yourself, right? That means you also have a poor outlook on life, negative thoughts, and this is all to do with a dishonest person as well, right? So a person that is dishonest or does not have integrity brings out the bad in you, right? Because they're always looking for shortcuts or easy way out in life, and they encourage you to do the wrong thing, right? And do we want to surround ourselves with those type of people? No, we don't. So they take a shortcuts, find the easy way out, and that's not what we want, right? All right, so we talked a lot about honesty right now, right? Because integrity and honesty are very interrelated, right? As we said, people who are honest have a positive outlook on life, right? The thing is, they acknowledge failing is a part of life, and thus are content with the outcomes, right? So they don't take any shortcuts. Ultimately, they really recognize that there's going to be up and downs in life, right? No one's going to have a perfect life, and they accept it. However, people who aren't honest, right, have a negative outlook on life. They don't recognize that failing is part, and thus they try to take shortcuts to avoid failing. And when you're doing that, you're just harming yourself in the long run, right? They aren't content, and they look for external for contentment, right? So from the sounds of it, when we talked about integrity before and when we talked about honesty now, they're very similar, right? But what's the main difference between honesty and integrity? Well, honesty is external, integrity is internal. When we're talking about honesty, right, we're talking about being truthful, showing those strong moral principles towards others. Integrity, however, is being truthful to yourself, right? Which is, I would say, arguably sometimes more harder than being honest to others, right? Because it forces you to sit down and have that conversation, right? So there's this quote here. Integrity is telling myself the truth. Honesty is telling the truth to other people, right? So that's the main difference. So when we talked about honesty before, we talked a lot about other people. We talked about society. We talked about trying to please them, right? But this is different. Integrity is how do I be truthful to myself? And that's what we're going to look into today. So relating that to our series, Improving the Quality of Life. So the main thing is why we talk about these virtues and why we're talking about this is only when you have integrity will you be true to yourself. So when you're true to yourself, then you could be true to others, right? And that'll simplify your life and have a happier outlook on it, right? You won't try to take shortcuts or try to cheat life, right? In a sense. And instead, you'll be content with whatever life you're living, right? And that's the main thing. If you're content with the life you're living, then you're going to improve the quality of your life, essentially. So if you're in any area of your life, are trying to bend your own morals, twist it, trying to find a way around what's supposed to be done, you are not living the highest quality of life you can, right? And that's why you would be here, right? So another quote here. I find this one really insightful. So being a person with integrity doesn't mean being perfect. It means being authentic, right? Society's pushing us nowadays to all be perfectionists and be the best versions of ourselves, but it doesn't push us to be authentic, which is why a lot of people are experiencing a lot of depression, sadness, right? Because we're trying to reach for the top, right? When we can only reach so high. So just being authentic is one of the best things you can do for yourself, right? Not trying to please others. And that's why integrity digs in deep and is truthful to yourself, right? Because you can only acknowledge your own issues and acknowledge stuff inside before you're able to acknowledge it outside. All right, so now we're going to move on to some reflection. So first, I am going to ask you guys a question I'm sure you guys have heard. So if you can cheat on a test, right, without anyone knowing, without any repercussions, right, would you do it? Okay, one person in the crowd is saying yes. Well, in all honesty, right, because this is what this is about, I would probably do it too, right? Right? A lot of us would like to think that we would take the high road, that we would not cheat, right? But in reality, we wouldn't. Why wouldn't we? Because we love taking shortcuts. But there's problems with this, right? All we see is a mark associated with the test. We see that, okay, if we cheat, we get a higher mark. We don't see the learning opportunities that we missed. If we know we're going to cheat and there's going to be no repercussions, we're not going to study. And when we're not studying, we're not truly learning the material, right? So there's that long-term pain associated with that, right? As I said, I would probably cheat as well. But as much as I like to think I wouldn't, right? But that's because that's how society has conditioned us. It's not your fault, right? Society is all about, it cares about grades, not learning, which is the biggest thing, right? So when you value someone's grades over learning, it's like valuing being a perfectionist over being authentic, right? And there's that connection there. So it shows that if you take the easy way out, right, where you don't learn, you just get the grades, right? It's gonna be harmful in the long run. So what do you think? Now, a different question. What do you think would completely change the outcome? Yeah, it would be if there was repercussions and consequences, right? If you were to get a suspension or expelled from your school, right? That would change, right? That would change your decision, right? And that's how society is nowadays. You guys, it's very based on consequences and repercussions for wrong things, right? But not really enforcing the right things. And that's why a lot of us would cheat on tests, right? Because they don't enforce the right in the question. They don't they don't phrase the question what would be the best learning opportunity, right? They phrase it what would be the best grade, right? So that's the biggest thing. So it's not your fault, and that's just the way society is. But we personally, inside, can change that mindset, and that's why we're here today to talk about the internal aspect, right? So now I want you guys to do a bit of internal reflection, right? So on a scale of 1 to 5, how much integrity, in a sense, do you integrate in your day-to-day life? Thinking 1 is like your moral uprightness is very strict, right? You're very strict with yourself. These are my morals. I will not break it, and I will be honest. And whereas 5 is the complete opposite, right? You bend the rules to try to take shortcuts, easy way out, and are not really true to yourself. So, any numbers? 2, okay. 3, 5, okay. 5, wow. Okay. Now, so I would probably put myself between a 2 and a 3, right? So growing up in a really household that emphasized morals, right? It's always been there. It's always been part of me, right? But I'll talk about this more in my personal experience later, right? It's not the easiest thing. It's actually one of the hardest things, right? To always keep this moral uprightness. So I'm guessing that we all want to attain that one, right? We all want to be moral upright. We want to be honest. We want to have integrity, right? So how do we attain that, right? Well, I'm gonna tell you how do I think I want to attain it. So my personal experience. So I'm a university student right now, and one of the biggest discussion topics nowadays is the topic of academic integrity, right? So it's been very relevant in my life over the past year because it's been online, right, due to the current pandemic. So there have been opportunities for people to bypass academic integrity structure, right, quite easily. And that caused me to reflect, right? So there's this dilemma going on, right? So we know that other people are cheating, right? If you know other people are cheating, right, and they're taking shortcuts but getting better grades than you, right? What would you do? What would you do in this internal battle, right? It's kind of the battle between the right and the wrong here, right? But a lot of people will say everyone else is doing it, so why can't I, right? And that's a very valid argument, if I'm honest, right? You're losing because other people are taking the low road and they're not upholding their moral righteousness, right? So when other people cheat, right? In university, you have the chance to get lower grades, because of something known as standardization, right? And you face the consequences of other people's actions, right? So the biggest thing I found that was the motivating factor for me to uphold integrity, right, is going to be karma, right? The thought that everything you do, whether it's good and bad, will come back to you in a sense, right? So if you stay true to yourself, right, there's going to be no negative repercussions. For the people that do cheat, right, they're going to face a repercussion later. When you cheat, I mentioned this before, you're not really learning anything, right? You're not learning anything. And that's the point of this courses, right? That's the point where you go to university, right? It's to learn. But no, they think it's for grades, right? They think it's for to get those high marks, right? And that's the biggest thing, right? When taking the road of academic integrity per se, right? It's not going to be easier. It's going to be 10 times harder, right? But in the end, it'll be 100 times more rewarding, right? It's like putting a FAST 8 on, right? If you're always cheating, right? Soon enough, there's going to be a breakthrough where people will realize that you don't actually understand the topics, right? You might be getting the 90s, the 100s, right? The A's, the A pluses, right? But there's going to be a time where they realize that you put a FAST 8 on that's not really yourself, right? Whereas the people who work hard, right, uphold integrity, they're going to have a much better understanding. As they say, hard work beats talent, right? But in this scenario, hard work always will beat cheating as well, right? It may not look like in the short term, right? It may not look like it. But that's one of the big things about integrity that we have to consider. It has short-term pain, but it always has long-term gain, right? So it's really an uphill battle, right? It's an uphill battle when it comes to academic integrity. And that's been my personal experience, right? You're fighting against these people who are cheating and abusing the system, right? But in the end, they're going to have long-term pain, right? And I'm going to have long-term gain. So that's the biggest thing. So now I'm going to move on to a little story now. It's called The Emperor's Seed, and it's a story pretty much about integrity. So there was once an emperor who had no children and needed to choose a successor for his empire. Thousands of children from across the kingdom came to the palace and were surprised when the emperor exclaimed that he was going to choose one of them. He gave them all a seed. They were to go home to their villages, plant the seed in a pot, and tend it for a year. When they returned in a year, the emperor would judge their efforts and choose his successor. There was a boy named Ling who received his seed and returned it to the village. His mother helped him to choose a pot and put some soil in it. He watered the plot every day, and after 1 week, the children of the village were getting together to compare their plants. After a few weeks, there were signs of life in all but Ling's pot. The weeks passed. Ling continued to water his pot every day. After a few months, the pots came to real life. Some had trees starting to grow, some had flowers, some had shrubs. Poor old Ling still had nothing growing in his pot, leading the other children to make fun of him. Ling continued to water his pot every day. A year had passed, and it was time to return to the palace to show what they had grown and decide on the new heir. Ling was anxious as his pot still showed no signs of life. What if they punish me? They won't know that I watered it every day. They'll think that I'm lazy. His mother looked at him in the eye and explains that whatever the consequences were, he had to return and show the emperor his barren pot. Ling and the other children entered the palace gates. By now, some of the plants were looking magnificent, and the children were wondering which one the emperor would choose. Ling was embarrassed as other children looked at his lifeless pot and scoffed. The emperor came out and started to make his way through the crowd, looking at many impressive trees, shrubs, and flowers that were on display. The boys all puffed their chests and tried to look as regal as possible, hoping they would be chosen as the heir to the empire. Then the emperor came to Ling. He looked at the pot, and then he looked at Ling. What happened here? He asked. I watered the pot every day, but nothing ever grew, Ling murmured. Then he moved on. After a few hours, the emperor finally finished his assessment and looking at all the wonderful grown plants. He stood in front of the children and congratulated them on their efforts. Clearly, some of you desperately wanted to be emperor and would do anything to make that happen. But there is one boy that I would like to point out. Ling, please come here. Oh no, thought Ling. He slowly sauntered to the front of the group holding his bearing pot. The emperor held up the pot for all to see, and the other children laughed. Then the emperor continued, A year ago, I gave you all a seed. I told you to go away, plant the seed, and return with the plant. The seeds that I gave you were all boiled, until they were no longer viable and wouldn't grow. But I see before me thousands of plants and only one barren pot. Integrity and courage are the most important values for leadership than proud displays, so Ling will be my heir. Yay. So, I want you to take a minute, reflect on the story and what you learned. I know I did talk about integrity and courage being specifically the morals of the story at the end, but I want you to dig a little deeper than that, right? What does this mean to you? How can you apply it to your daily life? All right, so the biggest thing he displayed to me was that he stayed true to himself, and that was the most important thing, right? He did not try to fool anybody. He did not try to, even though there was a part of him who wanted to not go, right, with his barren pot. He just he showed integrity and courage, which was the main things, right? The combination between the two shows the commitment to the seed he was given, right? Not to the actual plant that was to grow out of it, right? So this relates to self-confidence, right? Which is something we're going to discuss after. But basically, his commitment to the seed, right, shows that he has self-confidence. He was confident in himself and that he watered it every day and that he took care of it, right? But nothing ever grew, right? The other children must not have had self-confidence, right? When they saw nothing was growing, they must have taken the shortcut, taken the high or low road, and they would have tried to make something out of nothing, right? And that was the biggest thing. Even though there was the short-term pain of embarrassment, right? There was long-term gain, right? Because he ultimately became an heir to the throne. So this brings me to the question, what stops us and distracts us from living a life of integrity, right? What stops me from waking up tomorrow and saying, I'm going to live a life of integrity and no one can change my mind, right? Any ideas?
Laziness.
Pardon me?
Laziness.
Laziness, that's good.
Crowd seeker.
Yeah. Crowd seeker, trend follower, those are all good, right? So yeah, the main thing I'd identified it, whether it be crowd seeking, whether it be laziness, is short-term gains, right? Whatever they do is for short term. They can only see so far as to, oh, this will benefit me the next minute, the next hour, the next day, right? So they take shortcuts. They'll be lazy. They won't study for the test, right? So in the story, there was a combination, right? Because there was a vices and there was greed, right? A lot of people wanted to become the heir because they only saw the money, right? But they didn't look, as like the story said, a proud leader displays courage and integrity, right? And they wanted recognition or whatever, right? So this was the main thing in the story as well. So the moral kind of here is when you place your short-term gains over your long-term gains, you will never grow and learn, right? That's one of the main things. And this will help you live a high quality of life, right? Only if you start looking at the long term and can look past the short-term gain, then you can make an impact. Think of the same analogy in, say, an ice cream cone, right? If you think about the one ice cream cone that you can eat right now, right? And how good it'll feel, right? You'll go with the short-term gain. But if you look at the long term, right? Every day I'll be like, ooh, another ice cream cone, right? You're not going to see how detrimental it is to your health, right? it's not going to help you. It's going to affect you, right? But a lot of people can just see the one ice cream cone that day, right? So that's the same analogy. So that brings me to this, the underlying root cause, right? So we talked about integrity being the inner, true to yourself, right? And honesty being true to others and displaying that outside. So what's the underlying root cause to both of this? How do we know who's a person with integrity and who's not? Well, I'll tell you, it's a person with a pure heart. They need a pure heart. This is the main thing, right? No matter what facade you put on, no matter how you try to display yourself, apart from who you are, it'll never work, right? And only the people with the purest hearts can actually live a life of integrity. Think about it. Integrity is based on your definition of right and wrong, right? Part of the definition was having strong moral principles. How do you define your moral principles? Is what you think right and wrong is, right? So, if your definition of right and wrong shapes your morals, right? That will shape your actions. And your actions will reflect, ultimately, your definition of right and wrong. So, a person with a pure heart, right? They'll know what the difference is. They'll know right from wrong without a heartbeat, right? But people who don't, then you'll start to see cracks. Even if they're trying to display themselves as a person of integrity, right? You'll start to see cracks. So a person with a clear heart, right? They will reflect that in their actions. And vice versa, right? So Ling had a pure heart, right? We all can agree on that. And that is ultimately what led him to the long-term gain, right? So a pure heart means you have both integrity within yourself, right? And when you're true to yourself, then you can be honest to others, right? So it's the underlying foundation between the two. So focusing on being honest to yourself, right? That's what integrity is, which can only be done with a pure heart. So we'll go back to the definition of integrity. There was two parts. There was one is the quality of being honest, right? So that's the quality of being true to yourself, right? Which you can exhibit when you have a pure heart, right? You're true to yourself, and then you can exhibit that towards others. But the second part, having strong moral principles, right? How do you have that? How do you have strong moral principles? Well, the answer to that is you need a clear objective and purpose in life, right? Think about it. So we'll start with someone who has no objective, doesn't know what they're doing in life, right? What's important to them, they don't know. Well, they won't know the difference between right and wrong. Why? Because they don't know what their purpose is, if their purpose. Because the right and wrong definition is not set in stone, right? It's arbitrary. It's different to everyone else. So, knowing your difference between right and wrong is what helps you attain integrity. But not having that clear foundation will not allow you to live a life of integrity, right? So think about this, right? Say a student, right? If he values grades over learning, right? Then he won't live a life in integrity. But we can see that. Why? Because he doesn't have a clear purpose.
Mm-hmm.
If his clear purpose was to say get a good job per se, right? That then he'll as much as the grades are valued, the learning process will be valued more, right? Mm-hmm. The grades get you into school, the learning keeps you there, right? So ultimately, if a person with not a clear foundation, they are not honest and lie, and ultimately will lie in their lives, right? Opposite, you need a person with a clear objective, right? They'll know what's important to them, right? Sure, grades are important, but learning is much more important. And that, because they know objectives, they'll know to differentiate right from wrong. All right. So now we're going to tie that to self-confidence, right? Can anyone tell me how self-confidence relates to integrity?
Takes courage to do the right thing.
So exactly, that was really good. So there's actually a there's a correlation between self-confidence and integrity, right? The person who cheats on the exam has low self-confidence in their own ability to do the exam authentically, and thus they'll only be hurting themselves if they cheat. It's pretty clear. A person who knows this stuff and won't have a reason to cheat, right? But a person who likes taking shortcuts, likes taking the easy way out, they'll have a reason to cheat, right? And that is directly from their low self-confidence, right? So that's how self-confidence plays a part, right? You also need to look at and if you have that low self-confidence right now, how can you build it? Maybe you need to work a little harder. Maybe you need to try different strategies or anything. So that's how self-confidence ultimately relates to integrity, and how there's a correlation between the two. So now we're going to talk about how, like, the differences between living with integrity, right? So living with integrity, which one is going to have short-term pain, long-term gain? Is it the person with integrity or the person without?
Short-term pain, long-term gain with integrity.
Yeah, with integrity, right? Where does the pain ultimately come from?
Just they have to do that effort with their integrity. That's the pain.
So one could be, as you said, the effort, the extra effort that requires, right? Another could be foregone opportunities, right? They may have to sacrifice some things, time, like social life, or they may have to sacrifice actual opportunities because they have to put that effort elsewhere, right? And they're gonna encounter ultimately more failures and setbacks, right? But the difference is they treat these failures like opportunities for growth and learning, right? We compared learning to grades. Well, learning is what's gonna keep them going, right? The gain is gonna be they're gonna be better off in the end, right? They're gonna be more knowledgeable per se, right? And a lot of the motivating factors nowadays is there no risk for consequences for living a life with integrity, right? What's the worst that can happen, right? There's no real consequences because it's encouraged, right? Now let's take the flip side, living without integrity, right? Short-term gain, long-term pain, right? So what are some of the pains associated with life of no integrity?
Many failures in life.
Mhm.
You don't get true relationships, like true friends, because you're not true to them. So
Yeah.
they leave you.
Yeah, so first of all, there is major consequences itself for not living a life of integrity, right? Say cheating on exam, there's always that inherent risk of getting caught. And what happens then, right? You've ruined your whole some people ruin their whole life for an extra 10%, right? So they don't learn much, right? They, as Denise said, they're lazy, right? They like to take shortcuts, so they experience no growth in their life, right? So they experience these long-term short-term gains, right? But these short-term gains aren't piling up to add knowledge. They're just staying there. You're staying the same person you were before the test, per se. But the gain they're gonna have, what are some of the gains they're gonna have?
But
The short-term gains. It's gonna be the higher marks on the test, right? The higher marks on the test, the feeling better in the moment, right? But it's gonna leave you worse off, right? So
they will get the gain on the wrong place because they will get the good marks, but no career, right? No good job and no opportunities.
And we can relate this back to the foundation, right? We were talking about people who have a clear purpose,
Mhm.
they'll live a life of integrity. If their purpose was grades, right? They don't have a clear objective, right? Their purpose should be career. And career is not grades. That's just not the only thing, right?
Mhm.
So ultimately they experience less growth, right? They're not the best versions of themselves. And that leads them to live a lower quality of life,
Mhm.
right? Constantly trying to put on a mask of like, oh, I'm this, I'm that, right? Oh, I'm this. So that's the biggest thing, right? That's why a lot of us are living a lower quality of life, right? So we need to step back, and really ask ourselves a lot of these questions, the hard truth questions, and then we can only be true to ourselves. And then when we are true to ourselves, then we can be honest or true to others, right? So we define a person with integrity now, right? It's clear. They have a clear purpose of and objective in life, right? And then they can define those using that clear purpose and clear objective. They can define their moral principles.
Mhm.
And remember that connects back to the definition. Integrity is having strong moral principles, right? So that's how it all comes full circle. So what are some virtues do you think then a person with integrity would need to be to maintain a life of integrity from some of the things we discussed?
Consistency.
Sure.
Consistency. We discussed already honesty,
Yeah, honesty,
humble.
humble. So I have three main here, but these are all really good. One is purity, right? Because you need the pure heart. You need the pure heart, right?
Mhm.
The second is going to be honesty, right? Because when you're true to others, you're also true to yourself, right? And you're going to have moral righteousness, which means having those strong moral principles, right? So ultimately, the clear means to achieving their objectives will result in them knowing the difference between right and wrong, right? That's a big topic in today's society. What's right, what's wrong, right? So no matter what it is, there's things that are more agreeable, there's things that are more debatable, but you all know inside, and what you think is the only thing that should matter, right?
Mhm.
We're going to talk about that now. So I have a quote here, right? Pardon me. Okay, it says, if you have integrity, nothing else matters. If you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. Can anyone interpret that in a sense?
If you're true, then really doesn't matter. And you don't have integrity, just like you will do whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter. Like what people say, what like anyone could say.
Exactly. So it's about ethics, right? If you're true to yourself, you're going to be ethical. If you're not, you're going to have pride, ego. So let's talk about that, right? So if you have integrity, nothing else matters. That means, remember, integrity is synonymous with self-confidence.
Mhm.
When you have self-confidence, you're not going to care what other people say. In not a selfish way, but in a way where you're only absorbing the information
Mhm.
that is beneficial to you. So other people's negative actions and words won't bother you, but other people's positive or constructive criticism will also help you become a better person, right?
Mhm.
Throughout this whole process, you're still staying true to yourself and your opinion, right? And that's what ultimately leads you to live a life of integrity. If you don't have integrity, nothing else matters, right? Let's interpret that now. So, if you don't have integrity, you're gonna have low self confidence, right? Or it could be extremely high self confidence, right?
Mhm.
Either end of the spectrum is not good. So, extremely high self confidence is known as what? Mm-hmm. So, the people who don't have, so if you don't have integrity, nothing else matters. What they're referring to here is really that these people won't care what other people have to say, right? They don't value others' opinions, right? So nothing else matters but them. And that's not the way to live, right? That's selfish. So their pride is too big to consider others' opinions, and that means they're going to live a selfish life. So integrity means having that perfect balance of self-confidence, right? Where you still care about others' opinions, but you don't overvalue or undervalue them as well. So ultimately, we're going to reflect on some things that we talked about today. So why do we want to live a life of integrity? There's no wrong answers.
For peace of mind.
Wrong answer. Yeah. So yeah, it's peace of mind. Make difficult decisions with ease. You know what's right and wrong, right? Then you have clear objectives, and you can make those decisions with ease and with confidence, right? So that's the first point. The second point is your value reflect in your actions, right? You don't need to put a facade on, live a complex life, live a depressing but like busy life, right? You just live a simple, happy life, right? You know you're making the right decisions and you're confident with them, and don't appear two-faced, right? You are who you are. Be authentic. Don't try to put on a facade. And third is you are content no matter what, right? So although they face more obstacles, they treat them like opportunities for growth. Treat them like opportunities for growth and ultimately learn and become more knowledgeable in the end, right? So these are 3 ways that we can live a life of integrity. Now, how do we live it? We talked about why we want to live it. Now, how do we live it, right? So 1, you discover your purpose and objectives, right? That's the main thing. We said the bottom is like your pure heart, right? And you establish your pure heart by knowing the difference between right and wrong and knowing your objectives, right? So that's the main thing. So basically, just define your objectives and purpose. Second is always look for the long-term gain in decisions. Whenever you have a big decision, small decision, don't make an impulse decision. You need to look at the long-term gain, and that'll help you in your future, right? So 3, you wanna have your outer life reflect your inner values. We talked about your outer life and honesty, right? But that stems from integrity. Honesty, you can't live an honest life but not live an integrity life, because you're gonna be lying to yourself, but that means you're gonna be lying to others as well, right? So only with integrity can you embody honesty. So ultimately, I want to do a quick self-reflection now at the very end. So first, I want you to check. So check if your actions and values reflect in your actions. Right? Do you walk the talk? So there's a expression, walk the walk, talk the talk, right? That means whatever you're saying, you're actually implementing, right? So do you walk the talk? Second is check if you were doing stuff for long-term gain or short-term gain. We talked about this in the why as well, right? We want to look at the long-term gain and check the next major or minor decision you have to make. How are you approaching it? Are you approaching it from a long-term, short-term? And look at how you can look at it up differently if you're not doing it correctly, right? So third is check if you are scared of repercussions of any decision you are making, right? So cheating, we gave that example of academic integrity. People are afraid to cheat. Why? Because there's major repercussions. So check the next time you have to make a decision. Why are you making that decision? Is it because of repercussions, or is it because of more of a positive thing like learning? Are you taking the test because you're for grades, or are you taking it to actually learn, right? So ultimately, I just feel free to just reflect on this and reflect in your day-to-day life as well. So I hope this open your eyes on the importance of integrity, right? I hope you can be like Ling, who embodied the courage and integrity and ultimately got to live a life of integrity and courage while doing the right thing, right? And don't be afraid to be different is something that I always like to say, right? We talked about it here. Trendsetters, right? They're the different ones, right? But they have their own security in themselves. They have that self confidence, and you shouldn't always follow the crowd. If Ling had followed the crowd, right, he wouldn't have been king, right? So stay true to yourself. I feel like I've said this word a lot during this presentation, but stay true to yourself, and that's the greatest favor you can do for yourself. And lastly, maintaining integrity is best for you and those around you, right? There's an expression, I believe, it's your lies becomes others' lies as well, right? So once they find out, it becomes their lies as well. So only by if you're living a life without integrity, right, you're actually having a negative effect on other people as well. Take the exams, right? The people who are cheating, right? They're actually bringing down the people who are doing it authentically. So you have to consider the repercussions of your actions as well. But yeah, so overall, I hope you at least took away one thing from today's session. If you're enjoying this series, please feel free to look at the other videos. If you are interested in learning more about the Brahma Kumaris, feel free to check out our website. And we have Raj Yoga courses that we offer to help you gain more knowledge. And thank you and take care.